Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. This is Fix My Mix 32, where we listen to songs from the community and give advice about how those songs could be improved before they are released. And when you do release your songs, you know I'm going to point my finger. I hope you release them through the sponsor of this show. That is Distrokid, and if you follow that link in the description down below, then you'll get a nice 7% off of what is already a very, very cheap service. We'll be talking about DistroKid throughout the show. There's quite a lot of links in the description to talk about today because we've got a special show. We are going to be listening to some music. Sorry as I adjust my microphone. Can you hear that in your ear? Yeah, nice. What was I saying? I was in a flow, wasn't I? Yes, we've got a bit of a special show because today we're going to be going through my personal kind of checklist. Now, normally for me, this is a mental checklist, so I'm happy myself to have actually sort of written it out, and I may print it off and use it in the future so I don't forget things, because I often do forget things. And that was the purpose of this checklist, really, to make sure that we've sort of I was going to say cross the I's and dotted the T's, but that would be the wrong thing to do. Cross the T's and dotted the I's, whatever it is. Anyway, but this is hopefully going to help you as well to think about some things you may be overlooking in your mixing process. So we'll be talking about that later in the show, as well as listening to some music from the community. I'm going to say a quick hi. Before I do say a quick hi, I should point out that, in fact, you can download this checklist. If you haven't done so already, there's a link for it in the description, and that's the mix checklist that we're going to be going through today. Just follow that URL that you can see on the screen right now. And you don't have to put in your email address and stuff like that, and you'll get a link for that pretty quickly, hopefully. Some people, there seems to be a delay. Anyway, I hope a few of you have got it already. I'm going to quickly say hi to Princess LDG. Nice to see you here, Princess. And you're from America. I'm servicing the people from the Americas again. Nice to see Doug here. He's from the Americas as well. Doug, always good to see you here. And we have also good old Mimo Japan is here, of course. And I know Keonra's in here as well. I don't have a thing to click on for Keonra here. It's a bit of a shame, isn't it? Keonra actually did a review of my new course, The Absolute Beginner's Guide to Cakewalk, this week, which was very, very nice of her, and she had some nice things to say. We'll be talking about that in a moment. Lovely to see Kevin here, of course. Kevin is here, dedicated as usual. We've had some of Kevin's music on the show. It's been fantastic. And also we have John from Indiana. Nice. And we have, someone from Melbourne. Always good to see a fellow Aussie in here as well. Harsha Sri. And finally, so we can move on quickly, we have Pete Johns. Now, Pete Johns just had a great show, actually, talking about drums in GarageBand, and he is in the middle of Songtember, a challenge where people are creating music and writing songs during the month of September. He was on there with Jade Starr. Nice to see Jade on there, and just really interesting, fascinating to hear a bit of the behind-the-scenes process on drums for Pete's track. Now, this checklist that we're going to be going through today would be quite useful for people taking part in Songtember as they get closer to, perfecting their mix and releasing their songs. So, because it's not DAW specific, you could be using any DAW and use this checklist. Now, I will quickly say, if it had escaped your attention, that I also released in the last week or so my first course. I've got to tell you, it's a bit of a labour of love. I've actually been working on this for over a year. Several things got in the way. I don't want you to think I've been working at this and nothing but this for a year. But yes, but it was really pleasing for me to finally release it. It is an absolute beginner's guide to Cakewalk, and it is designed for people right at the beginning of their journey. I've hopefully kept the language nice and simple, not too much sort of slang. Oh, slang? There's no slang in there. I've forgotten the words now. My words have gone. Anyway, no fancy words in there. I've kept it nice and basic. If you would like to, if you're at the beginning of your cakewalk journey and you would like to follow that course, then I do have a discount code, which I'm putting up on the screen now, but it's also in the link in the description. It lasts for about 24 hours or so. You get 15% off, and hopefully you'll find that very, very useful. Let's move on and listen to some music. In fact, I'm only going to be playing one song today for us to absorb and think about the mix of, because there is a lot to go through with this mix checklist. So I wanted to dedicate most of the show to that. The song that we're going to be listening to is from, let me find the little thing I've prepared here. Let's put their name up on the screen so that you can see how wrong I'm getting it. G.Aware.Nerd is the name of the artist, okay, and the song is called Vibe Gon Do. Now, the email I got was the artist's name is actually Gabe. Hi Mike, great to make your acquaintance. My name is Gabe, stage name is G.Aware.Nerd. I'm a conscious alternative artist, hip hop, R&B, funk, soul, electronic, talking about human psychology, personal empowerment, and the symbolic relationship the individual has with society. Still in process of developing the content to the level I want. This song is called Vibe Gon Do. About how the current job, school, career paradigm in Western society might be a little too rigid. I've got to say here, it was a little bit refreshing to have a song about something. I'm just going to say that out loud. So yeah, great. It's nice to see someone thinking about the content of the purpose and the meaning of the song. No. Where do I get to? Yes, right. Okay. Song is in 3-4 times, singing and rapping, produced and mixed by me. There are some micro moments where the vocals are a little dissonant, ran out of space on the CPU to tweak those. How could I make the mixing changes, you ask? I'll probably just re-stem everything if possible. Thank you for your time. I look forward to my blind spots being outed. Now, everyone who's in the chat here, I hope you'll join in and help this artist out. We'll all help you, hopefully, Gabe, to find the blind spots you may or may not have here. So let's have a listen to this song. As we say, Vibe Gon Do. And here it is.
G.Aware.Nerd. I used to doubt me, yeah. Now the homies sprouting, yeah. I found the inner fountain, yeah. That made me juggle mountains, yeah. Was I prepared for the world? No. Was told I was no use. Yo. 18, now I'm supposed to be omniscient. No. School or job, can't find another decent option. Mama screaming, get a job, fool. Job or school. Meantime, worried about what my vibe gon' do. There's gotta be another way. Matrix was robbing my youth. Yeah, my vibe do what my vibe gon' do. Outwitted by the devil. Lost, comparing mine to others' levels. They all seem to know where they was headed. Many failed scheme to get a pigeon pocket breaded.
What is the point?
They got it twisted, can't tug my heart away. My soul would fizzle, never got to have my say. Well, they don't really care, can't change my path, it's red. Daring me to live beyond corporate. Get your fools, job or school. Meantime, worried about what my vibe gon' do. There's gotta be another way. Matrix was robbing my youth. Yeah, my vibe do what my vibe gon' do. Get a job, fool, job or school. Meantime, worried about what my vibe gon' do. There's gotta be another way. Matrix was stopping my core. Yeah, my vibe do what my vibe gon' do. Used to work at Walmart, had me working checkout. Draining AF, one day I quit during lunch, had to get the heck out. Everybody say I'm reckless, feel dumb as fuck. Most managers I had suck salt nuts. Everybody saw quote looking responsible. RBF said joy's impossible. They say the only way to freedom is to get a job, to have a place, to keep a job, but you never sleep well in your place. See, I take up more space, more values lost. Corporate can charge genitals for minimal cost and effort. They defer, that's their repertoire. Kinda makes you feel there's something bigger going on. Boss with half your IQ, half the staff in high school. Physically, mentally, social paragraphs, but I'm cool with haiku. Energy vampires need a quota, you can quote me, I'm voting on haiku. Overall, my hustle flow, Osh Coast goes to a job food, job or school. Meantime, worried about what my vibe gon' do. There's gotta be another way. Matrix is stopping my core. Yeah, my vibe do what my vibe gon' do. Get a job fool, job or school. Meantime, worried about what my vibe gon' do. There's gotta be another way. Slavery and death through the roof. Yeah, my vibe do what my vibe gon' do. Stun it, millennial. Stun all you hoes. Stun all you hoes.
Okay, something a bit different there. There was quite a bit to take in actual fact. Listen, I've got to say that I listened to this very, very briefly yesterday on my phone while I was just in the kitchen, through the little phone speaker. It's much more of a treat if you've got headphones on and decent monitors and things like that. I will say that about this. So if you are listening through your phone, you probably didn't get the best representation, as you won't with any music, really, to be honest with you. I want to talk about the actual composition in a moment. But first of all, just talk about the mix, because that's what we're here for. Doug in the chat there was talking about more sub on the bass. I think I agree with you, Doug. I sort of had to pause for a moment about whether I was correct about that, because I've got these new headphones on. I've only been using them for about a week, so I don't know quite how much I can trust them yet. With any monitoring system like speakers or headphones, you need to sort of get to know them to know whether you can trust them. So at first I thought to myself, is this lacking a little bit? And I specifically what Doug said, sub bass, okay, is this lacking a little bit in that area, particularly for this genre of music? I feel it should be there, and I felt there's a little bit of sub bass missing there. I would have to double check that on some different things, but interesting that Doug spotted that as well. I also felt like in the main parts of this song, because there was kind of a break where there was some rapping and the vocals were fine in there. I felt in the main part of this song that those vocals could still come up just a tad, okay, just a little bit, not a whole bunch. I wouldn't say it wouldn't immediately strike people that the vocals are too low in this, but just a little bit would be nice, okay. I didn't have a lot to say about this mix because overall it's a pretty good mix. But I will say that in the mids is where things got a little bit muddy for me, okay? There's a reasonable amount of backing vocals going on there with some harmonies, and they're occupying a lot of the same space as the sort of synth sound that was going on in there. And that was a little bit mushy for me. If you listen to that, it's all sort of a bit of a blur in there. So I would be looking at probably both the synth and those vocals and seeing where their kind of main frequencies lie, their fundamentals, if you want to use fancy words, and then, sort of emphasizing some of those in one or other of those instruments to give it a little bit of separation. But the overall mix, you're very, very close, very, very close in my opinion. I think to that degree where any regular listener who's listening to this is going to be listening to the content of the music rather than being distracted by anything in the mix. So overall, I don't think you've got too many blind spots in there. I just want to quickly say, though, it's a hot topic of debate in my household because my 15-year-old son listens to a lot of hip-hop, R&B, and rap. And we share a lot of time listening to music together, especially in the car. And so I'm exposed to a lot of this style of music, whether I'm into it or not. I have been in the past at different periods in this genre. So what I want to say is, for me, any complaints that I have about the current state of this kind of music are quite largely addressed by this song, and it's a little bit refreshing actually. The odd time signature is nice. The topic is nice, which is good in there. And yeah, I enjoyed it from that perspective. There's a lot of musicality in this. There's a lot of stuff going on with especially on the rhythm side, but even on the music side, there was some nice little surprises in there, some things here and there which I didn't quite expect, and it's always good to have some surprises in a piece of music. It can definitely helps our enjoyment when we're listening to things. So overall, lots of encouragement, I think, to Gabe. Thanks for sending this in. I think that you're just a long way along your journey. You just need to concentrate on getting your music out there to the world, I would say. That's the hard part, isn't it? Is getting noticed. But you need to get it out there first. So follow that link in the description. And what you will find is that when you get there, you'll be doing this. Release your music via Distrokid, there's just a couple of things you need. First of all, the music itself. Here's mine in my DAW Cakewalk, and I'm exporting it to an uncompressed WAV file for best results. Now the other thing you'll need is some artwork. I just grabbed an old photo which I'd taken on the beach, chucked on some text here, and that's what I call art. Then I went over to Distrokid and I just have to fill in this extra easy form. It's a no-brainer form. You get helped all the way through with little hints and things. You can't really do anything wrong. You just go ahead and confirm a few things about your music, and then you just have to actually upload the artwork and the song itself, and Distrokid takes care of the rest. It's going to send it out to all of the best platforms so that people can hear and buy your music. Please don't forget that if you would like to have your music featured on the show and have us help you with your mix, you can follow the instructions for that in the description down below. I've got a little ticker going along the bottom here, haven't I? I've gone the wrong way. Just follow that information there. So childish. And I would love to have your music on the show. All kinds of genres are acceptable here. Don't worry about that. It can even be instrumentals. It can be soundtrack types of pieces. It can be country, it can be western, it can be rock, pop, punk, metal, all of the things that you can be. It can be them, and we will listen to it on the show. I hopefully am now going to help you along with that mixing process, though, by running you through this checklist. Let me just get rid of that thing off the screen. How do I do that? Wish someone was here to help me with this. There we go. I've put this checklist together to help you through that mixing process and make sure you don't miss things. It is a checklist. As I was typing this out only yesterday, I realised I wanted to go into so much more detail than is actually on the list itself. But I wanted to make sure it wasn't actually an encyclopedia rather than just a checklist. So what we're going to do now is run through what we've got in the list, and I can slightly expand upon the importance of some of the things on there. So I will be kind of following along through my own checklist here, as well as I've got Cakewalk ready just in case I need to demonstrate a couple of things. If you haven't got this, then you can follow the link in the description to download it and then, print it out and keep it by your side as you work through your song timbre mix. And let's just get started right away. Hey, I don't want to dwell on anything for too long, but please do ask questions in the comments if you're here in the live chat, okay? And I'm sure there in the live chat, Kiona is going to remind you to hit the like button as well, unless she's already done it. So let's get started. Right at the beginning of this list, folks, I'm talking about some pre-mix stuff here. A lot of what we're going to be talking about in today's show is about preparation, because I'm a big believer in, as we work towards our static mix, and we'll talk about what that is, about doing your static mix as quickly as you can, like really, really quickly, much quicker than you think. A quick static mix is a good mix in my opinion. I was watching a video, just quickly, I'll say this, during the week, and they were talking to the guy who mixed Born in the USA from Bruce Springsteen. A couple of guys went to the studio, he pulled it up. They had to listen to it. He'd done a quick mix, so to speak, so that when they're in the studio, they could listen to different parts of it. And he was saying on the video that they asked him, and he said it took him about an hour and a half to create this mix of Born in the USA for this video on YouTube. And they said, well, yes, but surely it took you much, much longer when you originally mixed it back in the day. And he said, no, he said, it took me about 2 hours to mix the whole thing. Can you believe that? A song of that magnitude, of that thickness, a couple of hours to mix. Don't think that just because you're going to labor over a mix for days and weeks that it's going to be a better mix. I highly disagree with that idea. I think it could really hurt yourself. So, yeah. A lot of the stuff that we're going to have in this checklist is geared towards actually being able to do it. So the first thing we've got is get organized, label channels, colorize channels, and add markers. And you would note if you've got a copy of this project here, which is available to you. I don't think I put this in the description. Maybe someone's got a link for that. But you'll notice if you look at my projects that they're always, I use the coloring feature on channels to make sure I can easily identify them. You can't see it on this screen, but I definitely label everything meaningfully. It doesn't have to be meaningful to everyone. It depends who you're going to be working with on this. If you're just working by yourself, just make sure it's meaningful to you. And the other thing I always do is I put markers at the top. I actually tend to, if I've already written the song beforehand, like usually I'll write songs on an acoustic guitar or on a piano, and I've generally got an idea of the structure of the songs in terms of verse, chorus, etc. Then I actually tend to map this out right at the beginning of the project, to be honest with you. I just find it helps me to sort of know where I'm going and where I am. But sometimes you're actually composing in your DAW itself, so you may not have done that. But definitely at this stage, it's very handy to have some markers there so that you can easily see which part of the song you're in. That's going to help you when you come to doing, as I say, this sort of quick mix, as it were. So I don't want to go on about this too much, but I do think that it's more than just making things look nice and being a little bit OCD, as I am. It's more than that. It's about helping you to keep things flowing a little bit later on. I will say quickly, though, that if you've come up with an idea, if you're in the middle of your creativity and you think, I've got this great idea for a song, you grab your guitar, you grab your microphone, don't trouble yourself with making sure everything's labelled correctly at that point, okay? Don't, keep that flow going, okay? So the next thing that we will be looking at on in terms of the pre-mix checks is edits. It's just really important, I think, again, to have all of your edits done before you really get into mixing. Now, sometimes you're going to miss things and you're going to have to do some edits later on, but in general, edits are fiddly things. They're things that sort of really kind of can get you out of your creative flow and your sort of mixing flow. So I would make sure a few things done first. First of all, trim takes, okay? I like to get rid of as much unnecessary noise, vocalist shuffling bits of paper and kicking microphone stands in between phrases and things like that. I like to trim all of that out as much as possible, guitarists shuffling around, all that kind of thing. I also, at this stage, will make sure I like to finalize any comps. Now, this is actually important. So comps, we're not talking about compression here, folks. We're talking about composites. So this is where we've taken several takes of vocals and guitar, whatever it is you're comping, and we're patching them together and taking our favorite bits and making it sound like one performance. Hang on a moment. I think the link above is for the Cakewalk setup tutorial. Yes, it is, Keonra. The actual link for, let me just put it in the chat now. Sorry about this, folks. It is mix checklist.com. I could have just said that, couldn't I? I think that's the one you'll need there. So finalising those composites, again, that's a fiddly job. It's sort of not in the flow of mixing. So make sure those comps are done at this stage. Also correct any things like timing issues and things like that. Just make sure they're all done, whether they're MIDI parts or whether they're audio parts, okay? And the last thing is that I would do here is do clip gain adjustments. We had a show about gain. Was it last week or the week before? So when we're talking about clip gain, we're talking about the actual tracks themselves, and you're going through the tracks and you're basically finding things that are just standing out as much louder than other things. Typically this would be, say, in vocals, and it may have come about because of composites where you've got slightly different levels, or maybe the performance is slightly different, where suddenly you'll see visually even that, this phrase is much louder than the other phrase, or this verse is louder than the other verse. So what I tend to do at a clip level and at a gain level is just quickly go in and make sure those things are leveled out. This is not an appropriate task for a compressor, so don't think you'll be fixing this with a compressor, because these things are too big a chunks to really deal with compressors. And yes, whilst you could deal with it with volume automation, which we'll be talking about later, remember that these things, these things at clip level are going to be hitting things like your compressors at very different levels. So you're basically just evening all of that out. Very important to do that at this stage, I believe. Okay. And finally, in terms of actual preparation before your sort of static mix, or your pre-mix, I should say, I would say Melodyne. If you're doing any pitch correction with something like Melodyne, get this done now as well. And it's also, I would say, important that you do it at this stage and not so much earlier. You don't really want to be doing Melodyne before you do comps, for example, okay? That would just be a huge waste of resources and time in actual fact. So once you've got, especially for vocals, if you've got those comps done, you're happy with the performance, then do your sort of pitch correction after that. This is all preparation so that you're not being distracted by these fiddly little jobs when you're actually in the middle of a mix, because I want this to flow for you when you're actually mixing. Okay, so preparation here is key. Right, let's go on to the pre-static mix checks. I know there's a lot of pre-stuff here, isn't there? So this is a thing, a number of things that I like to do before I go ahead and do my static mix. So the first thing is I remove plugins or switch them off. Often I will have used some plugins and effects during the tracking process. Okay, it's not unusual for me to do that. I think that when, for example, you're recording a vocal part or some other part, that if there's a bit of a sound and a bit of a vibe going on, which is helped along with delays and reverbs and things like that, it can help your performance, okay? More, rather than just sort of playing along with a very dry backing track. So I do use a few plugins during the tracking process, just to give the ears a little pleasure, so to speak. But at this stage, and I learned this the hard way, sometimes I used to leave them on, and you start to get attached to these sounds as well, unfortunately, and quite poorly applied effects can become normalized to your listening. I learned a while ago now, just get rid of them. If you're really, really attached to a particular sound or tone that you've created, then you could just disable the plugins at this point. But I like to get rid of all the plugins because we want to do our static mix and balance our mix without the plugins first, okay? Also, plugins are going to be changing levels and, messing up your levels and things as you take them in and out later. So let's start with a clean slate and get rid of those plugins. The exception to this would be, of course, amp sims. Let me just bring that checklist up again. The exception to this would be things like amp sims. So obviously with a guitar, when you're using an amp sim, you are actually creating the sound and character of that instrument, okay? We're very, very rarely going to be using just a DI'd electric guitar in a track. Normally we're going to be, either we will have mic'd up a guitar, mic'd up an amp, or we'll be emulating that process with an amp sim. So I would probably leave those on, but we'll talk about it in a moment with gain, but let's talk about it in a moment with gain. So we're going to move on to gain. I've sort of almost carefully avoided the term gain staging here, okay? I've put check gain. Gain staging for me doesn't happen at one particular point in the process. Gain staging for me happens right at the beginning of actual tracking. Even when you're setting the level, the input level on your audio interface, folks, you are gain staging, okay? So I'm sort of trying to avoid the terms gain staging at the moment, and I want us more to think about healthy gain levels at any stage of recording and mixing, okay? But in order to do that at this stage, what I like to do, and it's one of the points on here, is reset all of the faders to unity, meaning 0, so that we can actually check the actual gain going into the channel. We can't properly check the gain if we've got our fader at something other than unity, okay? So it's important to do that. So I would say that what's important about this is just making sure it's at a good level. Whether you decide that gain staging is for you or not, and some people don't believe in gain staging in the digital age. I do personally, but if you don't believe, it doesn't matter. But the thing that you do want is to make sure your gain is healthy. First of all, it shouldn't be clipping. That should be obvious to you. So you shouldn't be going above 0 dB and hearing any clipping sounds. You can't get rid of that with a fader later. You also don't want it to be too low. If things are too quiet, then you will find that you're not going to be hitting your effects well enough. Things like compressors, etc. You just won't be getting anything out of it. And what's going to happen is your faders are going to be up too high. And can I just quickly mention something about this, which is really kind of important about gain and faders as well? I don't think I mentioned it in last week's show. I'll bring Cakewalk up here. Do keep in mind, you can't really see what's going on here, but I'm going to wiggle. Look, can you see this fader wiggling around? That's my organ I'm playing with there. I haven't even got Pete Johns on the show, and I'm being disgusting. So if you look at the little numbers on the metering there, you'll see that I'm on 0 here, and there's a big jump down to get to minus 6 decibels. So make a change of 6 decibels is quite a reasonable move on the fader, okay? But when we get down to the bottom, do you see this isn't a linear thing here? To move 6 decibels down here is a much smaller move. In other words, you have a higher resolution at the top of the fader than you do at the bottom. So if you're finding that your gain is up very, very loud on a track, and that has meant that your fader is spending all of its time down here later on in the mix, then what will happen is to make small changes will be much more difficult on your fader. Now, I think that small changes later on can make a big difference when you're dealing with whether a vocal is in the right place in the mix or not. Even half a decibel can make a big difference. So we'll move on from there. So I think we've probably addressed gain enough on the channel now. But I will say just finally that if you did keep the amp sims in there, do check the gain going into those and make sure they're at the right level. Now the next thing I do after this is actually a little bit of mixing. Finally, I do create some sub mixes. And I would do these generally pretty quickly, but these would be, so a good example of these is the drums. So I would get a mix between all the drums, something that just feels right, something that just sounds like a drummer in a room. We're not mixing it in the context of the song yet, but I would just get a rough mix and a balance between all of those elements of the drums, and then have them all go through to one bus, and that would be called drums, okay? If I've got pairs of guitars, things like, left and right guitars, they will all go through to one bus, and they will, be called guitars. I've put on here other submixes would be things like string sections, brass sections, vocal harmonies, etc. Now, I've put a last point on here. Optionally, send leftover individual instruments. This typically might be, say, bass, where there's only one track for bass. I still send that through to a bus. Why do I do such a silly thing? I'll show you why. Because most DAWs, when they create buses, here's all my buses. I'll slide them out over here for this track. Most DAWs are going to put them over here on the right-hand side, of the console. I'm not sure. I think there's some options in some DAWs to have buses over with the rest of your tracks, but most often we have the buses over here on the right-hand side. So later on when we're mixing, if we've got a whole bunch of things, like I've got here the drums, I'll wiggle that around so you can see it. And then I've got, strings and things like that. Rather than going backwards and forwards during the mixing process, because there's quite a lot of tracks here, I don't want to be going backwards and forwards. I like to have everything together. So over here, I've got some tracks, some buses, I should say. For example, trying to look for some good examples, actually. Well, the organ itself, we'll talk about it at the moment. So, look, the only thing on that bus is the organ, and that's it. But what it means is that I can do my mix later all from this area, mostly from my buses. So I'm going to be doing fine parts of my mix. We'll talk about it later on by going back to some of my tracks, but essentially, that's what I do. So that's the next thing I do, because later on when I'm trying to do my mix quickly, I don't want to be sort of fiddling around with routing too much. I don't want to be going, oh, right, okay, I want the drums to do this, but I've got to quickly now make a bus for them all. I don't want to be doing that. So this is a sort of this is just an organizational thing that if you do it before you really get into your mix proper, you'll find that you can work quite a lot quicker. Now, that is sort of everything in terms of actual preparation. So then we go on next to the static mix. But this is a good time, I would say, and you should do this quite often, to take a breather. Because you've already been listening to some stuff here with your submixers, right? You've already been sort of had your ears getting fatigued a little bit already when you've been doing your submixes. So make sure at this sort of stage that you do take a break, okay, to get those ears unfamiliar with the track again, so that when you listen, it's a bit fresher. And indeed, that's my segue to a break that I'm going to take now while we hear about what Distrokid can do for you. Do follow the link in the description down below. It's going to take you to a special page on Distrokid with this yellow banner at the top. That banner is letting you know that you're going to get a further 7% discount off your first year if you sign up here. And let's face it, it's already very cheap. If we scroll down, we can see that a year's membership is $19.99 per year for an unlimited number of albums and songs. And so long as it's your own music, there are no extra charges, and you get to keep all of the royalties from the various platforms. Platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, TikTok, Pandora, Amazon, Instagram, Tidal, iHeartRadio, Deezer, and more. Happy Ron is here. Always nice to see Happy Ron. Big fan of Ron's music, of course, as you probably know. What's the advantage of disabling plugins? Yes, so basically it's to Ron. Plugins themselves will, first of all, they'll affect levels, and they can often sort of muddy things, all right? So it's basically about clearing the decks. It's about having a fresh start and knowing, first of all, before you've added that plugin, before I even added that reverb or whatever it is I added, I know that my vocal, guitar, whatever it is, was sitting at the right place in the mix. So it's a way of sort of, starting with a fresh slate, I guess. Now, if you then switch the plugin on and that mix is all messed up, then you know it was the plugin that's causing the problem. But yeah, it's a way of creating a base, a starting point, really, a good starting point. Because if you've already got 4 or 5 plugins in there, you don't know as you start to mess with those later. I pretty much guarantee that they will mess with the mix. But yeah, so it's just creating a good starting point. Is the main thing I would say there. Looking for any other kind of questions in there, but I can see that a lot of you do use. I'm not sure if this is a joke or not. I like it if it is a joke. I've gained a lot. We did talk about gain quite a bit there, didn't we? And finally, Danny is saying, being a bass player, I always make 3 tracks of different signals of the same song. Dry, mix, cap, and effect. Yeah, it's a pretty good idea, actually, especially with bass as well, because as we know, bass is one of those instruments that can actually, in my opinion, often be only DI'd, depending on what you want from it, but can be really, really good DI'd as an instrument. But I like to use a mixture of DI and probably a sim in my case, although I do sometimes mic up my humble little bass amp, which is over there in the corner. True, very true, Ron. Don't ever let anyone mute or disable you. Yeah. I don't think they ever could. Ask Susie. she wishes I would shut up sometimes. Anyway, bless her. Let's move on. So here we get the fun part, the static mix. You'll see, if you're following along with the PDF, you'll notice that I've got this bit in yellow here, which you won't have in yellow. About midnight last night, I suddenly realised, there was something I forgot to mention in this bit. I've just highlighted this completely unrelated point in yellow here just to remind myself. So I'll try and update the PDF, but you might want to scribble on your own PDF, folks. One thing that I would have prepared here at this moment is some reference material. So for those of you who don't know, a reference track is going to be a song, another artist, maybe your own work, but probably another artist's piece of work, which is going to help you to give you something to compare to. Okay, and it's very useful to have one prepared at this stage whenever you're going to do any actual mixing. But you can use it at various stages during the mix. And a lot of people will ask me, well, which reference track should I use? And there's no real answer to that. I would say, first of all, the reference track should be a goal, something you have in mind. So a piece of music which you think in terms of an actual mix or in terms of its sonic sound, sonic sounds? I'm not sure that's a term. Its sonic qualities is what you are aiming for, okay? And so therefore it follows that it's helpful if it's got a very similar arrangement in terms of what instruments are used, and probably a similar genre. And, obviously, if your song is a ballad, there's not much point in having a reference track, which is an up-tempo song with a lot more rhythm and things in it. So you're looking for a similar piece of music, probably something you admire, because the biggest problem we have with mixing is, in my opinion, is fatigue, both mental but also ear fatigue. We very, very quickly lose objectivity with mixes. It's part of the reason why this show exists, in actual fact, so that people can now play their mixes to other people to get a different opinion. Neil's confirming to me that was a joke. Thank you, Neil. Nice to see that. I'm glad it was. Now, so just have a reference track is very, very handy to have at this stage, to give you a sense of where you want to go. And often it can just be really helpful if you're in the middle of a mix and you're thinking, is that vocal right? Is that at the right level? Just have a quick listen to that reference track and then get a feel for where the vocal's sitting in there. Okay. So choose the loudest part of the song first. There's sort of a good reason for doing this. First of all, often the loudest part of the song is going to have the most elements in it. It's usually going to have the most instruments, so it's going to be using most of the faders in your track, so it's useful for that. Secondly, because you always want to make sure you've got kind of headroom, okay, somewhere to go in terms of volume. If you start off by mixing a quiet part of the song and you'll have your faders up, say, fairly high, you're going to find as soon as you go to a loud part of the song that if you'll be clipping and things like that. By the way, I just want to quickly mention that although in theory, let's just go and talk about not gain this time, but let's talk about faders and things. Although in theory, there's no correct position to have your faders in, or there's no peak level on the metering where you should be going with individual parts. Let's say, for example, if we look at this mix, and let's just play a bit of this. Oh, which part of the song should we listen to? Oh, that'll be fine. So we're in here.
You've taken all you can. I take it on the chin. I'll be your fool. You'll never really know how far it is to go until.
So you'll see the bass, for example, here.
You've taken all you can. I take it on the chin. I'll be your fool.
It's actually peaking like really, really low in the mix. A bit lower than I'd probably have it, to be honest with you, normally. But it's peaking fairly low there, all right? It's not going up very high at all. Now, although it would be fine to go anything up to 0 in terms of, where it's peaking, experience has told me that of course, as things start to add up, if you've got that bass and then you've got the drums, if they're both peaking at -3, for example, your master bus could be already getting very, very close to zero. As you start to add in more elements, they all combine. So just sort of experience has told me, and this is not a magic number anyway, but for me, the peak number is about -6 dB. I don't like to go over -6 in songs like this because I very, very quickly find that I will be adjusting everything down later on. Okay, now you could just say to me, well, it's fine, Mike, just turn the master bus down. Yeah, that's okay, but what if you've already gone through a number of different buses and things, and those buses are clipping? It's not just going to be as easy as turning down the master bus, because that clipping will still be there in the mix. So anyway, that would be my advice if you're looking for a bit of a guide in terms of numbers. But you know, each to their own on that, I guess, but that's just where my experience has led me. So going back to our checklist, where did we get to on that checklist? Where was I at? Yes, so choosing the loudest part of the song. Now, at this point, what I like to do is I zero all the faders. Now, when I say zero the faders, it's probably a bad terminology, actually. I don't mean zero in terms of putting them at unity gain, 0 dB. I mean, I pull all the faders right down to the bottom so we can't actually hear anything. And then I start to introduce elements. And as I've mentioned several times on the show before, that I have a particular way of doing this, which is not the most common way of doing it. Most people are going to start off with the rhythm section, okay? They're going to start off with, you know, sort of drums, bass, rhythm guitars, pianos and things like that. They're going to build up that rhythm section, and then they're going to introduce vocals, and that's absolutely fine if you want to do it like that. But as many of you know, I do it the other way around. I start off with the vocals first, so I just get my vocals there. Probably I've put the fader on 0 unity gain for the vocals, and then I introduce elements below that and bring them up to levels, and as is sort of fairly normal in contemporary music, I like to have the vocals just a little bit on top of everything else. So look, however you want to do it, it's up to you, whatever you think is important for your particular music. But as you introduce these faders, and as you bring these faders up, and here for this static mix, by the way, we're only going to be using faders and panning, okay? Nothing else, no plugins, nothing like that, no compression, nothing like that at this stage. You're just going to be getting a very basic balance and work very, very fast. Okay, don't overthink things here. If you're finding yourself fiddling around on the faders, just with little tweaks and things here or there, you're taking this way too seriously, folks. Just trust your instincts. You've probably spent decades already listening to contemporary music. You know when things don't sound right. Don't you? I still don't. No, but seriously, you should trust your gut on this and just go for a quick, basic balance of things. Balance doesn't mean every fader's at 0 and everything's equal. Balance is that sense that things are in harmony with each other. That's probably a bad term. Now, just a quick thing on using faders. I know, goodness, you can't get much more basic than this. How do you use a fader? Just a quick thing, when you get that sort of that point where you've lost your objectivity, or you're second guessing yourself and you're going, is that vocal in the right place? What I like to do, it's a bit like tuning a guitar string. I like to get it completely wrong first, right? So I was doing the vocal here, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm not sure.
You've taken all you can. I take it on the chin.
And I'm moving that fade up and down just a little bit, and I just can never quite decide. What I like to do is make sure it's wrong. Okay, in this case, just drag that fade all the way down. You can hear that vocal's wrong. It's just way too quiet, isn't it, right? And then also you might make it too loud.
You've taken all you can. I take it.
Okay, just make a note of those two extremes, and then make a note as you push it. Where does it become obviously too quiet or too loud, and where are you sort of not sure? Where is it getting? And just take a note of where that is, right? Those are two extremes, right? And then it's going to be somewhere in the middle there, okay? But it's sometimes good to sort of refresh the ears with taking it a long way away from where it should be. That's one thing I'll do. So you won't often see like me bring everything up and then start listening. It's like introduce things from zero. Sometimes like shutting your eyes as well can really help, okay? Just closing your eyes, have your finger on the fader and gradually push up so that you're not being visually stimulated and you just, only your ears are working then. I find that ever so helpful. It's one of the reasons I've said in the past that I like to use a controller because you can actually switch your screens off and start to mix by just using the controller, which is really, really nice. Tasha says that I should have more puns in my tutorial videos. I know. I think I used to have more. Have I got too serious recently? I think I have sometimes. Anyway, who cares? So moving on. Now, you may find yourself at this stage, and I think it's perfectly okay. Look, there's no rules at the end of the day, but if you want to feel that there are rules, it's fine at the moment. If you've done this mix using, as I would be doing, the using the buses to mix, okay, to get your static mix, you will find yourself going back to the individual channels as well. Because, for example, you know how earlier on I said I would make a submix of the drums in isolation, just get them balanced, right? But now that I'll be hearing the drums in the context of the mix, then some parts of that submix will reveal themselves as not being quite right, okay? The snare's not quite where it should be. When I was listening to the drums by themselves, it felt like the snare was okay, but now we're in the song. So yes, you will find yourself going back and doing some little adjustments to those submixes as well, okay? And that's fine. But I would be focusing mainly on the buses. That would be my experience. And Doug, it's so true, isn't it? It's so true. I could just go to sleep right now. I hope the viewers won't go to sleep listening to this. So that is really, look, it sounds like a big deal, doesn't it? The static mix. Let's do the static mix, and let's say it in that voice as well. It's just something, if you've done all that preparation that I talked about earlier, my estimation of time on this gets less and less. 15 minutes for a static mix maximum. If you've done 15 minutes on your static mix, go away and have a coffee, have a beer, have a night's sleep. You don't really want to be sweating over this at this stage. But I would recommend, though, once you finish your static mix, again, do take a break. Breaks are really, really important when you're working in a home studio. In home studios, we can be very, very isolated. We get very, very close to what we do. And we're probably often the only person listening to it as well. And we can very quickly lose objectivity of what's going on. So next you will come in, and this is where the details come in. I haven't talked about the details a lot on previous episodes and things. What are the details? For me, just for me, and this is a very personal thing, I like to get those vocals right. I've been listening to this a lot. Vocals are so important. I like to start to get them sounding good. I haven't put everything on here. There's going to be a focus on EQ. Is definitely going to be a thing. That's to create a tone for the vocal, but it's also to make sure that it's got presence, okay? So I'll be looking at, where are the mids and the high mids for the vocals, because not all things about making things sound louder, it's not always about using a fader, okay? It's also now starts to be about exposing different parts of the frequency ranges on an instrument so that it's more easily identified or separated in the mix, okay? So I like to start off with the vocal personally, but you can do as you wish. Compression, I've put on here, use compression if required. I think there's a misconception if you watch enough YouTube videos to feel like, you should always have compression. Can I have a little bit of a whinge, actually? Let me do a little bit of a whinge at the moment. I'm a bit over YouTubers always talking about making everything punchy. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, probably me as well. But, there's a lot of tutorials around which are about making your kick more punchy and about your vocals have more presence and about... Okay, so we definitely want to make things more punchy and more present. But there's different roles for different parts in a mix. We can't make everything punchy, right? not everything has the goal of being punchy. All right, so think about that. So that doesn't mean that you always reach for a compressor for your vocals. If you've got, as I would often have, say, a ballad, which is mainly, say, a piano and a vocal, maybe a bass, there's a very good chance you don't need to compress that vocal, my friends. I can tell you, don't sweat it and think you always have to do these things. Really, it's the same. Think about what the role of compression is. The compression is a volume control, okay? Now, it can be a very useful volume control because it can work very, very quickly for very short periods of time, and it's automated because it's doing it based on the source, okay, the level of the source. So it saves you having to wiggle that fader around. But it's not it's not the only thing we use for volume. We're going to be talking about some other things later, but the key things are that the gain, clip gain that I talked about at the beginning, all right, getting that right. You can also go in and make some fine adjustments with that here and there. I wouldn't do it all over, but here and there. EQ, as we've just mentioned, is going to help to keep a vocal present in a track. Later on, we're going to be talking about automation as well. So that's very important. And one of the tools that's at your disposal is compression, okay? Now, obviously, compression or compressor plugins can have a secondary role of sort of adding color and character in there as well. But I don't want you to always assume, which is why I've carefully put in these notes, consider using compression if required. Also, I've just noted in here, consider using parallel compression. I find parallel compression is, sometimes I'll use, compression in the track and parallel compression, but I find it's a really useful way of just keeping a vocal very, very present. So I do quite often in mixes with more than a few elements use parallel compression. And don't forget to DS. I've just put that on the checklist. many, many times I've thought I've completed a track and I've gone, because by the time you've been listening to this perhaps for weeks, for days and weeks, you've already got used to that on that vocal. You've become desensitized to it, okay? So this is a good time to take stock and DS the vocal. I also think, and I've put a note in here, that all of these things, there's many, many parts of the details of the mix, but these are the highlights for me. The low end is really, 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 really important. And it's one of the hardest things to deal with. We talked about it, didn't we, on the first song of this show? And Doug pointed out that the low end in the mix there was, or the sub, I should say, was a little bit lacking. And I wasn't sure, and I was mentioning I wasn't sure because I'm using a new monitoring system. Low end is partly difficult because most of us have not very good equipment to judge it with. Unfortunately, we're home studios, right? We don't have the perfect shaped rooms. Some of you don't have room treatment. And some of them, like me, do have room treatment, but it's the best we could afford at the time. We didn't spend tens of thousands of dollars on it. And, we may not have monitors or even headphones that are the best on the low end. So low end is hard for most of us to judge, to mix it, because we're obviously even monitoring it for us is a struggle. But we do the best we can with the equipment we've got. But essentially, you just always want to be paying attention to what's in the low end. You don't want to have things in there which don't need to be in there. Okay, so when the vocalist was singing, that sort of boominess that was coming from the room they were in, or some reflections, or then when they kicked the mic stand, or when they went a bit overboard by getting a bit close and a little bit too warm, probably doesn't need to be there in the mix. Often with guitars, the very low end, if you've got a bass guitar in there, or you've got a low piano part in there, you don't need to have that low end of the guitar in there. Okay, so I think there's several elements here, but I generally, and this is a massive generalization, like to reserve that low end for the kick and the bass guitar. Okay, again, why is it a generalization? Because if it's a big piano ballad, then the low end of a piano is hugely important, or an orchestral piece, okay? There's several parts of that low end, but yeah, you want to be also creating space for any elements you do have in the low end as well. And we'll use kick and bass as an example here. And I've put in here, consider different ways of creating that space. So one is EQ. So looking at, say, the fundamental of your kick and emphasizing that is one way you can go. Sidechain compression is something which I've talked about a lot recently, and is very, very useful. So this is a way of using one source to lower the volume of the other, and often and typically, not always, we are ducking the bass so that we can expose the kick, which is playing just momentarily, okay? You can also use dynamic EQ for this as well, and probably not, but pinch, maybe automation, maybe. The other thing is to consider other masking. We talked about this in the first song. I felt that the harmony vocals were sitting in the same space as a lot of the synth there. What happens is rather than getting a sense of more, when we have lots of things in the same frequency space, it doesn't just make everything better and there's just more. It just, things cancel things out, okay, and we end up with a kind of a mushiness there. So mostly I would be using EQ to carve out some little spaces for places to live. Just think of it like that. I just want this frequency range, I'd like the piano to live there, or this part of the piano, but I want the acoustic guitar to be able to live here in a slightly different place. You're going to get more clarity and more separation in your mixes if you do that. Now, you most of this could be done with EQ. You could potentially also use parallel compression to do this, and certainly automation, okay? But masking is a really important part of mixing. It takes a bit of practice to sort of start to identify. You know what? Doug's just mentioned something in here, and this is the second thing that I sort of probably should have mentioned in the checklist more specifically. But high pass and low pass filters are really, really key as well. And if we go back a little bit to that low end, you know that amongst the several topics of controversy in our community, where people have very aggressive arguments in forums about certain things, one is the good old high pass, okay? Or low cut, or not so much the low pass, but that low end. I may have made a video here and there where I've suggested that I do it on a lot of my tracks. I might have overstated that, but certainly quite a few of my tracks, I will put a high pass filter on them. You know, as I've mentioned already, typically things like acoustic guitars, for example, where there has been quite a bit of boom, 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 boom down there, which just isn't needed for that instrument, especially when it's a mix with other things. But it can happen across the board, and it can also be there, but not particularly noticeable to you. Okay, so you end up with a situation towards the end of the mix where everything down the low end is very, very mushy, and you can't figure out why. But it's because of quite a few elements where there's a lot of information going on in the low end down there where you just don't need it. And as Mimo rightly says, depends on the mix. A lot of this it depends on. There's a lot of things which depend. If you get into recording your own music at home, and mixing as well, I know you'll tend to look for definites, okay, like definite numbers, things that should be at, definite things you should do every time. But I'm afraid the truth is that there's a lot of answers to questions in our community that really start with "it depends." Okay, it's okay, just follow some rules to begin with and follow some specific numbers to begin with, and you'll slowly learn where the exceptions are. Okay, this takes time. And then the last thing, and this is the fun bit for me, this is where everything up until now is sort of going, okay, it's sounding okay, you know, it's fun, it's balanced, it's nice. And then you can start to add in things, for me, then reverb and other effects. And this is where, it starts to sound a bit nice. This is a fun part for me. Enjoy it as well. So space effects for me. there's two types of space effects, and let's just say reverb for a moment. There's reverb, which is a stylized effect. I would say, for example, if you, I don't know, think of Elvis Presley's voice on Heartbreak Hotel or something like that. That massive echo they used to have. They weren't really trying to say, oh, Elvis lives in a cathedral. What they were saying, there was just a stylized sound at the time which made things sound cool. So there's that type of thing. We often have stylized reverbs on things like sort of guitar and what have you. But then there's the other type of delay and reverb, which is attempting to put things in a space to make something sound like it's in a room or it's in a hall or, or what have you. Okay. So, those are what we're talking about there. Mostly for me, I'm not using stylized effects here for this type of thing. I'm putting things just in a nice space. What have I got here on my notes? Okay, so I think always use my reverbs and delays on buses. First of all, I don't know about too much, but remember that reverb tends to make things sound further away the more you add with it, okay? So it can be a little bit dangerous in a mix. You put lots of reverb in there, but now you're losing clarity. So often, as I mentioned before, a good place to start with a little delay, a little sort of almost a slap back delay or something like that, just to make things sound less intimate, and then, give them a bit of space, a bit of reflections, and then use some light reverb, okay? But I almost always put them on buses. You get more control there. You can do things like use separate processes like compressing or EQing reverbs, and you can do them on the buses, okay, without affecting your main sound. What have I got on it? Don't forget to EQ, reverb and delay. It's almost always required, okay? It took me a long, long time, I think, to realize this early on, that I was getting that sound I wanted with things like reverb and making it sound great, but it was also making it sound muddy and mushy and made my mix sound like it's lacking clarity. So I would say that you're always going to be doing it. Now, also, as well as the low end, I think when Ed was on the show a couple of weeks ago, he rightly pointed this out to me, and he is quite right. I don't often talk about it. So with reverb, I'll often get rid of that low to mids. It can make things really mushy when you get a build-up in the reverb there. But also, you may want to EQ the high end of things like reverb and delay, because they can tend to over-accentuate this stuff up here, and particularly sibilants and things like that. They will really over-accentuate it. So EQing those things is pretty important and can make a big difference to the sound of the mix. You may also, I don't always do this, but you may also consider using compression to duck reverb. So this is a kind of an idea where while I'm singing da 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 da, there's not so much reverb, so it's being ducked by a compressor. But then when I've stopped singing, it's revealed. So you get that tail after I've stopped singing, and it's kind of released, and then we can hear that reverb. So that's another thing you can do, which a lot of people do with their reverb. And I have put in here again, remember, reverb can make things seem further away and less present. That may or may not be what you want to do. Okay. And then finally, I'll do other effects. I've actually kind of lied a little bit here. I had to put this in somewhere in the sequence, didn't I? Things like saturation, modulation. I don't use much modulation effects, many modulation effects. The saturation, look, not necessarily at this step. I may be doing this much further up here, when I'm doing my vocals and EQing them. I'll probably be adding some saturation in there at that stage, okay? But yeah, just something to remember. Also, saturation can be useful as a tool to make things sound louder, which I'm yet to make a video about, actually. But so adding saturation can make things sound louder, even though they're not technically louder, okay? So you don't really see the meters move, but you'll feel that things got louder. So saturation can be quite useful for that. And then finally, and I'm going to go through these last things a little bit quickly, automation. Automation is so important, folks. Why? Because up until this point, you have been working on that part of your song. Remember we said, let's start on the loudest part of the song, and you've got it all level, it's sounding great, everything's sounding perfect, except when you go to the verse, there's a different need for the song, okay? You don't need that instrument to be that loud in that part, or that vocal to be that loud in that part of the song. So this is why automation is so important. If you've got a dynamic song where there are actually differences between different parts of the song, then you've got different mix needs for those different parts of the song, okay? I'll let you into a little secret, if you like, here. Automation for me, although we've got these features indoors where we can sort of record movements on the fader, you can set it up to write automation, and then you can, in theory, move the fader around and then, put it back to read, and it will replay that movement on the fader. I don't do it like that often. I normally actually draw in my automation. I may do some test runs on the fader, but generally I draw it in on that, on the track lanes for my automation. That's just me, but that's why it's just a more logical way to do it for me. But anyway, you should be now going to different parts of the song and looking for where the balance needs to change for that part of the song in terms of levels. Okay. Now, some of the other things that you can automate is I've put on here. Let me just bring up my notes again. Width is something that you can automate. Okay. So we're talking about panning now. Okay. And this can be really, really useful when you get to things like sort of verses, choruses, I should say, when you go into a chorus to make things wider, to pan things out wider, then bring them in more narrow in verses. Just a little technique you can use to create. Well, it can make things sound a bit larger and wider, but it sort of stimulates the ears as well, keeps the ears hearing different changes in the mix as well. So it's a useful thing to be able to do. Space automation as well. So we talked about reverb and delay. Remember, you can really create a big difference if you, say, for example, in the chorus, you add some more space in there. You make things sound a bit larger. Just have that moving around a little bit. That can be a fun thing to do. And also with effects. I do quite often, not in detail, but I do automate EQ for different parts of the song. Typically, anyone who's heard my music will know how often my songs start off with a vocal, an acoustic guitar, or a single instrument, and then gradually more instruments are added in there. So, for example, the role of the acoustic guitar is changing in that example. At the beginning, it may be the only instrument that's there, so it needs to occupy a larger part of the frequency range. And then as we get into the song and the basses come in and the pianos come in, that guitar doesn't need to occupy that same range. So I do automate EQ. You could go onto separate tracks and then just, have EQ applied to one, not the other. But my preference is to automate it. I find that quite reasonably easy to do. And I've also put in there as well, just as a bit of a note, consider automation for effects, add spice, just anything. You could be use pan automation, to move things around to create some spice. You could be adding more. You could be adding some chorus or flanger in some part, I don't know. But just consider the idea that you could be automating some of your effects, okay, just to create interest for people. And then, finally, and we're getting there. It's almost time for all of us to take a break. But finally, post-mix. So once you've done all of this stuff, you need to take a break. And in reality is you need to then come back and have a listen again, maybe the next day, a couple of days later, a week later. This is going to be the most valuable thing you'll do, is to take this break, go away, come back. But what I don't want you to do is take that break and come back and then listen for another hour kind of and toy over what's... What I want you to do when you take that break is come back, load it up, and then play it. And within the first 30 seconds, see what hits you. See what hits you, right? And it will be something like, hadn't noticed before, the vocal's a little bit too quiet on that verse there. So you'll do your adjustment. Okay, take another break, come back. Gradually, you're just going to be ticking off things, okay? Is going to be, and gradually you'll just hone in, and you'll get to a point where you'll feel like, yeah, I've really done the main things. At this point, you'll send it in to me at Fix My Mix, and we'll tell you what's wrong with it. But it'd be a good time at this point to also be listening on different systems. I don't over listen to me these days. Depends how good your monitoring is and how much your monitors, your headphones reveal to you. But I sort of feel like for me, little secrets. I've got some. You'll notice in my videos, I've got some computer speakers up on my walls. You know, they're Logitech computer speakers. I'd never recommend them for mixing, but they're kind of like a go-to for me of some very ordinary speakers that they're nothing special at all that people might listen to. So I run and mix through those. I also, in the bedroom, I have a Bose speaker, kind of one of the big ones, you know. It's and you know, Bose, just like Beats, are renowned for being overemphasized in the low end as well. So I like to have a listen there, because I know if I kind of listen there, yeah, it might be a little bit bassy. That's okay for the Bose. But if it's really over the top, then I know that I haven't listened to the low end enough there. Again, this would be another good time to compare your mix to reference material as well. And as Rock is saying, in the car, I don't often do the car run anymore. I don't know why. I used to do it a lot. I used to go for a drive in the car. Maybe it's the hassle factor. Mind you, it's easier now, isn't it, really, with just transfer it to your phone, connect up to Bluetooth. My car, let me tell you, folks, in terms of money, where does my money go? My money goes on guitars and things like this. I've got my car has been going on way too long. It's an old Kia Sportage, not the best brand in the world. It's got 330,000 kilometers on it, and I bought it for just over $1,000 about 3 years ago. so just think, if you look in my studio and think it's got some fancy stuff, I've sacrificed the car. One of these days it's just going to die, but it keeps going for some reason. Don't know why. Anyway, so it hasn't got the best car stereo, I can tell you that for sure. So yeah, but we could listen in the car as another. Play it to other people. Now, I say this with caution. I always use my mum as an example, but I'm not really going to test my mix on my mum, because my mum always says everything I do is great, okay? So she's not really truthful, my mum, about my music. So she's not the most useful person to have in terms of checking a mix. So find people that you know that person who's always negative about everything. They're not the most useful people as well. Find the people that sit somewhere in between, who are just going to be truthful. When they think it sounds good, they're going to tell you. If they think there's some problems, they're going to tell you. Okay, they're very special people, those ones, in life in general, for all kinds of advice. But yeah, you definitely want to be finding the right people. There's sort of, I'm mixed on the idea of how well educated they should be. So if I go to Ed Thorne, for example, he's going to say to me, "Hi, I think you've got a problem in that 400k range." That can be useful. That's okay. But I also like to have those uneducated ears, those people I know who just listen to music, and who are going to go, "Oh yeah, just basic things usually, like, oh, vocals are a bit too loud, or oh, that hi-hat was annoying me, that was poking it." So some uneducated is, don't get too many opinions as well. Like having 20 opinions is not always useful. And do remember that people are listening on different systems as well, so they're going to give you opinions based upon the systems they're listening to as well. You need to repeat this process as required. And then eventually, not too long, don't look, at a certain stage, you've got to accept that you will never, ever produce anything, ever, that to your ears is perfect. And everything you ever produce will always sound wrong to you 6 months later. Maybe not, actually. Some things you realise they were actually okay 6 months later. But it's often the case. I've got music certainly released, which I think, what was I thinking? Not happy with that mix at all. That's just a part of this thing, folks. Accept it. Accept that not all of your work will be perfect, but do get it out there. There's a certain there's a certain amount of liberation in actually saying, this is the best I can do at the moment. I'm going to put this out there to the world, and now it's done. I'm not going to tweak it anymore. It frees you up to work on your next song, okay? It gives you space in your mind to go, right, I'm ready for inspiration to come back in again and to start making my next piece of music, okay? So please try and understand that even the best artists in the world have had music out there that didn't have the perfect mix, okay? Please understand that, some people sometimes won't like your things. Some people will like your things, okay? This is a part of this whole being, whether it's being a musician or mixing your work. So live with the fact that you are at a certain stage right now. You can only be the best of where you are right now, yeah? In terms of your abilities, your listening skills, these listening skills happen over time, okay? They're not something you can get instantly. They come through practice. And just do the best that you can do at the moment. And then, as people are saying in the comments at the moment, and I think it's really worth pointing out here, taking criticism is a skill. I will say as well that I don't know how many artists, I've no idea how many artists we've now played on these shows between Fix My Mix and featured artists. Hundreds. I can only think of one in my experience in that whole time that I thought took the criticism badly, okay, and not in the spirit it was meant. Everybody else that we've had on the show has taken it so well, and I'm so proud of the people that do send their music in. It can get a little harsh at times depending on what guest I've got on, but I really feel that this is a great community in that way. So I want to say thank you to the community, especially those who have hung in there for this whole 1 hour and 22 minutes and gone through this checklist. I'll try to update this checklist soon with a couple of things that I may have missed on there. I have to tell you, folks, that it's been an incredibly busy time recently on Creative Source, because I have been, focusing on getting out that Absolute Beginner's Guide to Cakewalk. There's a link for that in the description. Did I mention that? Don't forget the code. It's going to get you 15% off for about 24 hours. But that has been very, very busy. And I have to tell you as well that coming up in the next 4 weeks or so is another intensely, I think it's going to be one of those busy times I've ever had. Firstly, because I'm launching some different things, which I'm not going to talk about at the moment. I have some incredible hardware and very interesting hardware reviews, not least of which is these headphones that I'm wearing right now. Right? And I will be mentioning the elephant in the room, which is how much these headphones cost. I can't remember how much they cost. I didn't pay for them, okay? Let me just have a look. In Australian dollars, and I can only tell you what they are in Australian dollars, these headphones cost $2,699, okay? I don't know what that is in American dollars. I wish I could find that out quickly. Somebody can work that out and talk about it. Okay, so have I frozen? Oh, no. So the thing is, so I will be mentioning the elephant in the room with these headphones because they are super duper expensive. But I have some really interesting things to say about them. I know most of you are not going to be able to afford things like this, but do watch out for that video and take a look, because I think I've got some interesting perspectives on this. Are they perfect? You'll find out. I've also got some really interesting emulation microphones coming from Antelope Audio. Some really interesting stuff. I've never used any mic emulators at all. Thank you, Conrad. $1,700 for these headphones. That has to be a talking point of the headphones. I can't ignore that. I can't pretend I always use headphones. It's expensive. I don't. Okay. So, these emulation microphones are coming up, but also I have to tell you, and I can't tell you about it, but there's some big software releases coming up. Some of which, or all of which, I have access to already before they're out, and many of which are in depth. So spare a thought for the poor old YouTuber who has to read lots of manuals and figure these things out before I can show them to you. So it's a super busy time. I'm also recording. Oh yes, I've also been using a hardware compressor. The Warm Audio WA2A. Just late last night, me and Susie were recording a demo using that, and I'm going to be sort of comparing the use of. I'm going to be comparing, what it's like to use a hardware compressor as opposed to a plug-in, or using a compressor at all, what the track sounds like without any compression, what it sounds like with an LA2A style opto compressor on there. So I only got that a couple of weeks ago. I've only just plugged it in and used it for the first time to do this. I haven't analyzed the results of it. So I'm super busy. And this is my way of apologizing to you if you send me emails or messages or mention me on Facebook and that sort of thing. If I don't respond to you, I'm so sorry. It's just a bit mental at the moment. I'm very, very time poor. But your comments and your support of the channel is very, very, very much appreciated. I'll leave it for there today. I hope that this list is going to be useful to you. It's going to be useful to me. I can print it out now and make sure I don't forget all of these things when I'm mixing. I will be back with Fix My Mix around about this time next week, and I look forward to hearing some more music from the community. Thank